FRYDENBERG has reportedly told the Coalition Party Room that a rough couple of months awaits following the end of JobKeeper by the end of March. FRYDENBERG's warning follows the release of analysis from the CommBank estimating up to 100,000 jobs could be lost following the end of the scheme. To discuss this and more, of course, I'm joined from Sydney by the Managing Director of Accenture, Dr. Andrew Charlton, and from Melbourne, Herald Sun and Weekly Times columnist, Terry McCrann. Andrew, to you first, we'll start with Josh Frydenberg's comments. He expects things will get rough around April and May. He's talked about a whole lot of investment and savings being accumulated during the pandemic as some sort of post-JobKeeper relief fund. How do you think it's going to play out?
Well, obviously a lot of people are very worried about the end of JobKeeper. There are currently 1 million Australians on JobKeeper. Staggeringly, that means there are 1 million Australians in the private sector whose wages are being paid by the government in full or in part. And that's going to come to an end in the next month. So obviously, for many people, that appears to be troubling. But there are a couple of facts here that people need to keep in mind. First of all, at its peak, JobKeeper covered 3.6 million workers. And already, the vast majority of those, about 2.6 million, have come off JobKeeper, and the economy has survived that 2.6 million people coming off JobKeeper. Now, of the remaining 1 odd million people on JobKeeper, the question is how many of those people will be let go by their employer once their wage stops being paid by the government? And we have a little bit of data around this. Firstly, we can see in the ABS statistics how many of those million workers are workers that are going to work, doing their job in the firm that currently employs them, and how many are still being paid but sitting at home because there's no work for them. And the answer to that question is actually quite positive. Only about 10% of those million workers are sitting at home, not working, not going into their place of work. And so that's the most vulnerable number. That's about that 100,000 that Josh Frydenberg is referring to in terms of the people who we might expect to lose their jobs when JobKeeper ends. But keep in mind, that's only about 0.8%, less than 1% of all workers in Australia. So it will be a speed bump for sure, the end of JobKeeper, but it's one that the Australian economy should be able to manage through.
Yeah, and I think people need to listen to what you've just said there about the percentage that could be there at the end of March in trouble, I guess, and understand that when the politics are inevitably played as well. Terry, I want to go to your column yesterday. You were eviscerating of the loss for the Libs there in WA, and I'm 100% behind you. It was a stupidity to go with some of those policies that were further to the left than the left. But you say it's also impossible after that rout for Scott Morrison to win the next federal election. Tell us why.
I know that state results don't necessarily translate to federal results, but the big thing that we've seen over the last 12 months was the way that the state premiers benefited from taking the tough approach on lockdown. And the reality is flowed into the very good results we saw in Queensland, and we also saw in WA, much bigger in WA. But the bottom line is the reality of what happened in 2019 when the Feds, the Liberal Feds coalition, essentially won the election in Queensland in particular, but also WA. And the prospect is that they won't be able to repeat those results again in 2022. And the big things that were hanging around Bill Shorten's neck, negative gearing, the attack on negative gearing, and the proposal to do away with franking credits won't be there either in 2022. So both push and pull factors are going to help dramatically Labor in 2022. And we're certainly not going to see an early election in 2021, as has been suggested.
Andrew, let's talk Bitcoin. News over the weekend, all-time high in terms of Bitcoin value. Concern about the cryptocurrency because, of course, it's not regulated across the world. The Modi government in India says that they're planning to outright ban cryptocurrencies. You hear of a lot of people buying into Bitcoin. I haven't heard that many people have got their money out. What do you make of cryptocurrencies as a product?
I think people out there should be very, very careful of cryptocurrencies. Ultimately, this is a big gamble. what is the long-term value of Bitcoin? The answer to that question is very hard to determine. You know, at best, its only utility in our lives is as a store of value, like as an alternative to gold or as an alternative to hard currency. But here's the thing that people thinking about investing in Bitcoin need to keep in mind. It's actually not even a very good store of value. It's quite hard to transact with. It's quite expensive to create. It's not very stable in terms of the way it stores value. It goes up and down all the time. And for me, the kicker is the following thing. The amount of energy it takes to create and mine Bitcoin. This currency is created by supercomputers churning away. And last year, it took more energy to create Bitcoin in that single year of 2020 than it did to power the whole of Argentina. So if people think this currency is the future, this currency is what we're all going to be using in 10 years' time, I think they should think very carefully about that. It's not a good medium of exchange, it's highly volatile, and surely we can't be introducing a new global currency that is so energy intensive it could destroy the planet.
Terry, I want to go to the issue of electric cars. We've talked about this, you and I, many, many times, but there seems to be a bit of discrepancy. There's moves to introduce in Victoria payments, taxes per kilometre driven for electric cars so that they pay their own fair share of the road user charges, because obviously they're not paying a fuel excise. But in Canberra, Trent Zimmerman, he's a moderate out of Sydney in the federal parliament, he wants electric cars to get a cut in the luxury car tax and to have lower rego to drive the uptake of electric vehicles. What do you make of this?
Well, it shows again, just to pick up again on the point that Andrew made about Bitcoin being so energy intensive. Well, clearly, if we all move to something similar applies to electric cars. If we all move to electric cars, we're swapping one form of energy, petrol, for electricity, and we'll need to think very, very carefully about how we're going to supply that electricity, because you clearly can't hook those electric cars or solar panels. So there's so many. There is no free lunch at the end of the day. If we move to an all-electric fleet and we no longer get the fuel excise, we're certainly going to have to raise the taxes from some other process, which is a tax on electric cars. So you could play games at the edges like Trent Zimmerman.
Andrew, there's all these issues.
Alternative.
Yes, I lost your line there at the end there, Terry. Sorry to interrupt you. But Andrew, I'll go to you just on the point about the geography always gets Australia in terms of the electric car take-up argument, because obviously the distances to put charging stations are a very different proposition compared to Europe, but of course even the United States, which has got a populated interior, unlike Australia. I mean, all this talk that there'll be no combustion engines in sort of 10 years' time, is that realistic?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'd say is, there must be lots of viewers out there shaking their head at the proposal to remove or reduce the tax on luxury cars. If we were going to be proposing to cut state taxes, the luxury car tax surely would be a long way down the list. Think of all the small business people who are struggling under payroll tax. Think of the whopping stamp duties that first home buyers are paying when they try and purchase their first family home. The luxury car tax would be way down the list. It is true that we need to think about how we are going to pay for our road network after fuel excise ramps down. I do think that electric vehicles will become an increasingly large proportion of the total vehicle fleet. Terry is right that we're going to need to think very hard about how we produce the energy to support that. We can't just be whacking those straight on the grid. But I think as part of the energy transition that we go through over the next 2 years, we have to accept that electric vehicles are going to be a big part of that. There'll be problems to solve. Interstate transport, as you correctly point out, will be one of those problems. But the bigger issues are how will we fund the road network after fuel excise is so much smaller, because that many fewer people are buying fuel, and how will we power this new energy grid that will be required to support these vehicles? Those are big challenges. Right.
And let's throw nuclear in the mix, because we want to have electric cars and reduce emissions. Just running them off our grid doesn't work like Europe, which has nuclear in the mix. Andrew, Charlton, as always, thank you for your time. Terry McCrann, you too.